Welcome class to chapter 2, which is called The Role of Biology in Psychology. Let's see if we can burn through this. A lot of stuff. The nervous system, a network of literally billions of cells in the brain and body responsible for all aspects of what we think, feel, do, everything. The nervous system has three basic functions: to receive sensory input from the world through our senses, of course, to process the information in the brain by paying attention to it, perceiving it, and remembering it, and to respond to information by acting on it. You can break it down, the nervous system, into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Part of the nervous system that consists of the brain and the spinal cord, that which is encased in bone, 100 billion nerve cells. And then the peripheral nervous system, part of the nervous system that enables nerves to connect the central nervous system to the muscles, organs, and glands. So you've got central nervous system, and then peripheral nervous system, of course, out in the periphery is a good way to remember that. And here's how it's broken down here even more. Central nervous system, CNS, the brain and spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system, the PNS, the somatic nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system, which can be further broken down into the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Better drink some water here before I say all these long words. Another diagram just kind of breaks it down. Central nervous system completely surrounded by bone, suspended in cerebral spinal fluid, covered by meninges, and protected by the blood-brain barrier. That was almost a spoonerism, and here it is right there. And then the peripheral nervous system, coming out, being able to touch stuff, sense pain, all that stuff, and then that sends it to your brain, which you experience those things. Somatic nervous system, think of soma, and it regulates body activities that are under conscious control, such as the movement of your skeletal muscles. What is the longest muscle in the human body? Anyone know? Autonomic nervous system, the part of the peripheral nervous system. This part transmits sensory signals and motor signals between the central nervous system and the body's glands and internal organs. Two divisions, sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Both divisions control the activity of organs and glands. Autonomic, not under your control. Autonomic nervous system regulates the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight, and the sympathetic pupils, the fight part, and the flight part. It's the active part, right? And what's going to happen here is it's going to ramp up your body. So to get you ready to fight or get the heck out of there. And how does it ramp up your body? Your pupils dilate so you can better respond to things like seeing in low light situations. Respiration, your breathing increases, your heart rate increases, and your digestion decreases, because you don't need to digest when you're in that fight or flight mode. You need to protect yourself and survive. And then you need to chill out. So here comes the parasympathetic, the paratroopers coming in to chill you out, and sort of the opposite happens. You sort of chill out and stuff. That's why poker players like to wear glasses so you won't see their eyes dilate. Sometimes it's a sign of lying too, also, or your nervousness and stuff like that. And broken down. I kind of repeat stuff and then have people pause and test yourself and stuff if you want to do that. Broken down in kind of the three main brain divisions, and basically these different slides are just different ways to break down the brain and categorize the brain and that type of stuff, which I find is helpful. Midbrain, and I like to go through these slides and just have a feel for where they're at inside you, and for me it's helpful just to know where it's at geographically speaking, and then know what it does, and I don't know, I can kind of get a sense of the place of it and stuff. But this goes over some of the midbrain and hindbrain, and then the forebrain and the different structures that is important to know. I like to think of the hippocampus, we'll go over in a little more detail, as a hippo on campus, and so it's an easy way for to remember, like the hippo is trying to study and create memories on campus. Thalamus, the sensory gateway for seeing and hearing. Basal ganglia, motor planning and movement and reward. A lot of dopamine there. Cerebral cortex, thought and planning. Hypothalamus regulates body functions, a lot of different body functions like temperature, hunger, sex, emotions. Amygdala associates emotions with experiences, sort of the fear little area. And then you can separate into 4 lobes: the frontal lobe, complex thought, planning and movement; parietal lobe, touch, spatial relations; occipital lobe for vision; and temporal lobe for hearing and memory. And that would be the forebrain of the cerebral cortex. We're breaking down into the 4 lobes. Prior to that, we were looking at the subcortical structures more in specificity, and now we're looking at the cortical region, which would be the different lobes right there. And as you can see, one's related to, you know, how you're thinking about stuff, and interesting, it's kind of in the front. There's some motions related to that too, as well as planning, movement, as we saw with Phineas Gage when he had an injury through his head, or you might see that in the next chapter. And then parietal lobe related to touch, spatial relations. We think of that as pared, like a wall in Spanish, and you can touch it. And then temporal lobe, you hear, and in the area too, it's right by your ears, right? And so it's temporary, the sound disappears. And then the occipital lobe for vision. I just remember that just 'cause it's kind of a cool sounding name. And in the book, that kind of goes over some of the different functions for each of the brain structures. And as you can see, your brain has different structures that relate to, of course it works together. It has a lot of neural circuitry and connectomes that are all connecting, and it's working in concert together. But it does have specific areas that are tasked for specific things. And as you can see, the medulla in the lower part of the brain, breathing, heart rate, other survival mechanisms, pons, sleep arousal, left-right body movement coordination, and the cerebellum for motor learning and coordination and balance, also thought of as like the little brain. Substantia nigra is initiation of voluntary motor activity, and thalamus, sensory information except for smell, which goes directly to the brain. And talked about those other ones, and then the different lobes that are in the cortical structures of the forebrain versus the subcortical structures. So just notice that, how it's broken up into the, like I said, the cortical structures, cerebral cortex, subcortical structures in the forebrain, the hindbrain and midbrain coming back here. We kind of breeze through it, but you know, the hindbrain, midbrain. So that gives you an idea. Okay, and these slides I just usually go over. Look at how small that fish's brain is. So sometimes hard to trick though with those flies. You know, you gotta hide under, especially those really smart old brown trout. But you can do it with the right presentation and, you know, that type of stuff. No drag, don't get them scared. But anyway, they grow brains as, you know, the brains get bigger. They grow brains. Brains get bigger as the animals progress through, you know, the evolutionary stages, if you will, fish to frog, from bird to human. And you'll notice that there's a lot of similar brain structures, but the thing that the humans have is a cortex, and a big one, and that's freedom to do a lot of different things that a bird can't do. For example, you know, it can say the same things as us. It can do some pretty interesting things. You know, those crows drop in the nuts outside on the street, and then the cars run over it, and then they go eat it. But probably not as smart as a human, right? Or most humans, you know, I would imagine. Anyway, this one kind of again shows more intelligent animals have increased uncommitted or association areas. The cortex is vast areas of the brain are responsible for integrating and acting on information received and processed by sensory areas. So as you can see here with the motor areas, sensory areas, and then association areas. The association areas are light, and they get bigger as we progress in evolution up to the humans, the height of evolution, right? Um, cerebral cortex, again, this is kind of going over the 4 lobes of the cerebral cortex, and then important regions within the lobe. So this is kind of cool. So you have, again, in the cerebral cortex, what makes us, the humans, right? And chimpanzees have more of it, and then lower, okay, so we have the most. So what's it all about? Prefrontal cortex, attention, self-control, and social processes. So when you'll see the injury that happened to Phineas Gage when the bar went through his head, he lost a lot of self-control and had trouble relating to people. And so you see that that's related to functioning in that area, the prefrontal cortex. Primary motor cortex, primary somatosensory cortex for touch. So you have touch and motor strips right there. And it's fascinating to see with the motor strips how they're putting like computer transistors in people's brains that can't move, and then they have like mech bodies, and the brain figures out after them testing it for a while, they kind of figure out how to control the exoskeleton using their brain. And the brain has a strip of computer chips attached to the strip. So that's kind of cool. Primary auditory cortex for hearing. The fusiform face area for face recognition. So you actually have an area for face recognition, super important for humans, right? If we're going to be able to recognize a threatening face or something like that. And damage to that area causes very much difficulty for people to recognize like threatening faces if someone's coming at them all harsh or whatever. And then there's a primary visual cortex for vision. And then what I wanted to show in this slide was that in addition to the primary sensory cortex and the cerebral cortex, you have an area layered, which is the associational cortex. And each primary cortex has an associational cortex, combines information to represent complex objects or patterns, whereas this is just the primary sensory cortex is simple contours, boundaries, location, sensory qualities like color and pitch. You'll see what I'm talking about here. If you look at these things, which some of it's related to memory too, so you have different areas of memory for different senses. And some of it is more than likely just it's tuned in that way to recognize these things. Responds when eye looks at complex patterns, images of objects, abstract forms, faces, and then the fusiform area. So that's the visual associational cortex. So there's certain areas that respond to non-complex patterns, and then certain areas that respond to complex patterns. And then auditory associational cortex, recognition of what sounds mean, responds to bird calls or speech sounds versus pure tones. Again, different area that's responding to those things. You can recognize objects by touch. Again, that's related to memory. Oh yeah, those are keys in my hand when you close your eyes. Obviously, right? You hear it, whatever, but just touching it. Motor associated control, execution of movement. And then the higher order associational cortex carries out complex processes not associated with any sense, language, thinking, and planning. And that would be in the front area right there. And then you got Broca's and Wernicke's area for speech production and comprehension. This goes over it again. I like to kind of test yourself, right? Pause, test yourself. It's kind of cool. And now we're jumping into neurons. We're at the 13-minute mark, almost halfway through. How you guys feeling? Feeling charged up, ready to go, fired up, ready to go, ready to learn? All right, here we go. Neurons, basic units of the nervous system. This is a picture of a neuron. These are the connectomes. I was saying earlier that your brain has just massive connections, and think of that neural circuitry connecting to things automatically happening, making things automatically happen, like a thought or response to pain, take an action, even do some hand movement while you're talking or whatever. Basic units of the nervous system, cells that receive, integrate, and transmit information in the nervous system are neurons, of course. Beginning to sound like Yoda, are neurons. Neurons operate through electrical impulses, communicate with other neurons through chemical signals, and form neural networks. Woo! There they are, the neural networks. And they connect and talk to each other through chemical signals. Fascinating, right? I think it is. I mean, it's how we think, right? So that's kind of cool. Structure of neurons. So there's dendrites, a cell body, soma, the axon. It's covered by myelin sheaths, and there's these nodes of Rainier that help it jump really fast. Terminal buttons at the end that release neurotransmitters into the next cell. This is the next cell over here, and those are a bunch of dendrites, bunch of them. Check them out, all over the place, waiting for those chemicals to be released. And then the chemicals are either going to be positive or negative. They're going to like make the cells tell the cell fire, excitatory, or they're going to be inhibitory. So they're going to tell the cell don't fire. And they basically sum it up, and then they go, oh, does that tell me to fire? And then they fire. And then there's this electrical signal that kind of goes down there, and it's caused by chemicals, again, like sodium and potassium and chlorine and some other ones. Axon, there's the long narrow outgrowth of the neuron. Terminal buttons, so at the end of the neuron releases the neurotransmitters. The synapse is basically the empty gap between them, and yes, there's emptiness, gap, and where the chemicals can freely roam and go in these lock and key things, go find their home, and then lock and key, or get degraded and taken away by enzymes, or reuptake. Action potential, the neural impulse that travels along the axon, then causes the release of neurotransmitters into the synapse. If it says fire, it's called action potential, and that electrical impulse goes right down there. And it releases the neurotransmitters. Down there at the terminal buttons. And the neurotransmitters go out in the synapse, and they look for home, and they connect in there. And the neurotransmitters are either excitatory or inhibitory. I said positive, negative. I meant excitatory or inhibitory earlier. Transmission, reception, integration kind of goes over that process.